Well, we can look around and see trials everywhere. If we look around, we can find trials pretty easily. They don't hide from us very well. So I want to ask you, don't answer, but what trials do you face? What are the hills, the mountains, the obstacles that stand in your path? If you've ever been hiking, you know that an obstacle, a hill, can be a literal trial as you've carried your pack along for some distance, and then the Appalachian Trail, as it does, begins to ascend, and your feet start telling you that you are not ready to ascend with it. And your heart beats through your chest, and you think, when was the last time I went to the doctor? Trials can be literal. Obstacles can stand in front of us, but they can also be things, well, you know what they are. Mr. Rogers, the famous PBS show. Did you guys grow up with Mr. Rogers?
Mm-hmm.
This past week I saw a video of him testifying before Congress trying to justify PBS spending. And this was in like 1972. It was fantastic. Go to Facebook, I think it's where I posted it. He spoke just like Mr. Rogers, and he was talking to Congress. It was great. They should have heard him recently, because he talks about playing well with one another. But he talks about trials that children face. We don't think about that often. We think about our trials. Are the test results going to come back positive? We think about our trials. Is that application going to be successful? We think about the things that grown-ups think about, but he talks about kids' trials, fears of going to the doctor, or even a haircut. And I don't have a fear of haircuts. I just sometimes don't get to it. But he talks about real trials that kids worry about. From where will our help come? The Lord is our keeper. St. Augustine writes about this passage. Seek not, or don't look for a keeper among people. People sleep, they fall down, and they fail. Every single one of us, eventually, every single one of us will fall down, will fall asleep, will fail. This psalm tells us God doesn't sleep. God is with us always. No matter what we face, no matter what perils lie in front of us, God is more powerful than that. It may not seem like that sometimes, but this passage is a reminder of God's power. It affirms God as the creator of the heavens and the earth, and God is capable of doing whatever we need. Psalm 121 is a part of a 15-psalm section called Song of Ascents. Each one is called a Song of Ascents. And it goes from Psalm 120 to 135. They're also known as gradual psalms. They begin and build. They're known as songs of decree, songs of steps, pilgrim songs. And as we hear the words of Psalm 121, or read them over again to yourself, you see the joy, the comfort, and the assurance in this psalm. There's a Native American proverb that says, tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. The fact is, we can trust God. That's the fact. And when we do, our lives are richer and we can truly know what divine and holy peace is. That's the fact. The truth is, God is with us. No matter what we encounter, no matter what we face, no matter where we go, God is with us. God protects us and watches over us. And God is at work in our lives, sometimes when we don't see it or realize it or even acknowledge it. Think about the parable of the unjust judge. Now Jesus uses this as an example. The story involves a woman named Yunho. Yunho lived in a little village in Korea a long, long time ago. And she was at her wit's end with her husband. When they had first married, they had been soulmates. Were absolutely in love with one another and were happily ever after to begin. But then her husband went off to war. And when he came back, things had changed. Things were different. He was different. He was cross. He was angry. He was agitated, unpredictable, frequently didn't know why, but he was very angry. And had almost become afraid to live with him. Now, in her village, when someone was sick or had a need, they went to this hermit who lived on the mountainside. And she always took pride in the fact that she never needed to go. Yunho could solve her family's problems herself. She didn't need to go visit the hermit on the mountainside. She could figure things out on her own. But this was different. She was desperate. She was at her wit's end. So she went. She hadn't quite reached the hermit's shack when she heard from inside the open door a voice. "I hear your footsteps. What do you want?" Well, she explained her situation. He replied, "Yes, this is often the way with soldiers when they return from war. What do you expect me to do about it?" "Well, I'd hoped you would make a potion or something that he could drink to make him the way he used to be, to restore him." He thought for a while. He said, "Come back in 3 days, and then I will tell you what I can do." Yunho went home and then returned 3 days later. He greeted her with a smile. "I have good news for you. There is a potion that will restore your husband to the way that he used to be. But it requires a very unusual ingredient. I don't have it. You'll need to go get this unusual ingredient." And she, of course, was excited. Yes, what is it? I will go get this." And he said, "It's going to be very hard to come by." She said, "Whatever it is, I will do this because I want my husband back." And he said, "I need a whisker from a live tiger." She gasped. "That's impossible." He said, "I can't make the potion without it. There's nothing else I can do. You should go ahead and leave." Well, she went home and she tossed and turned all night. How can I get a whisker from a live tiger? The next morning, she left the house before dawn with a bowl of rice with a meat sauce over it. She went to a cave on a mountainside where she knew a tiger lived. She clicked her tongue very softly as she crept up. And she set the bowl in the grass outside the cave, and then, as silent as she could, crept away, careful not even to step on a twig or a piece of leaf to make any sound. The next day, before dawn, she did it again. Approached silently, clicked her tongue, saw the bowl was empty, and placed it with a fresh one, and left again, trying to be as silent as she could. So it continued. She did this day after day for several months. She never saw the tiger. Thank goodness, she thought. But she knew from the footprints in the ground around the empty bowl each day that it was a tiger and not something else that was eating the food. Then one day as she approached, she saw the tiger poke his head out of the cave. Her heart beat through her chest. She was terrified. She stepped very carefully, set the bowl down in the same spot, clicked her tongue as she had been doing every day, picked up the empty one, and went back. After a few weeks, the tiger came out of the cave as it heard her approach. Another month went by, and the tiger was outside sitting, waiting for her when she arrived. Gradually, the tiger was waiting closer and closer to the bowl. Eventually, one day, as she came into the clearing outside the cave, she saw the tiger sitting right next to the empty bowl with his paws on either side of it. She was shaking. She could barely step forward. She could now see the full size of this beast. She could see his sharp eyes. You could see so clearly. His nose, she was sure, could smell her because she could smell him. She could see his razor-sharp claws. And when he yawned, could see the size of his fangs. She set the bowl down and picked up the empty one and crept back. And as she was walking back to her village, she thought to herself, I must be going crazy. It actually looked a little kittenish. The next day, she experienced the same thing. He was sitting with a paw on either side of the bowl, and as she got there and replaced the bowl and was walking home, she thought, it looked so friendly. The next day, she noted how soft the fur looked. And a week later, after having greeted it face to face each day, she built up enough courage. She reached out and touched his head, and he let her pet it. And when he did, he let out a slow, grumbling purr. You can't imagine the depth and roar of a tiger purr, but then it stretched out on its side like a house cat. She knew the time had come. The next morning, she took with her a small knife. And after setting down the fresh bowl and petting the tiger, she said in a soft voice, "Oh, my tiger, may I please have just one of your whiskers?" And with one hand she pet the tiger, and with the other she reached and took the whisker, reached down to her, and cut it off, slipped the knife and the whisker in her pocket. She thanked the tiger, and she left for the last time. The next day, she waited until her husband went off to the rice paddy, and she ran to the hermit as fast as she could. She was out of breath, and she burst into his little shack, and she said, I have it! I have the tiger's whisker! He said, Really? From a live tiger? Yes! She cried. She was panting. She couldn't barely breathe. Well, how did you do it? He asked. And Yunho told him the whole story about slowly moving closer and closer over the past 6 months. And she went through this whole experience. Her heart pounded again as she recounted the size of this beast. And with pride, she reached in and she handed him the whisker. The hermit examined it. Seemed satisfied that it had come from a live tiger. And then he flicked it into the fire and it burned up. She was shocked, and he turned and said, You don't need a tiger whisker potion. You don't need any of that. Tell me, is your husband more vicious than a tiger? Is a dangerous beast more dangerous than your husband? Yes. If a dangerous wild beast will respond to your gradual and patient and persistent care, do you think a man will respond any less willingly? She left and she thought about what he had said. Sometimes our problems can seem great and incredible. They can seem huge. They can seem insurmountable, sort of like taking a whisker from a live tiger. But God is with us. Always. Always. This psalm tells us that no matter what, God is with us. Instead of focusing on the size of our problem, let us trust in a God who made the heavens and the earth. A God who never slumbers or takes the divine eye off of us. Sometimes God is already at work in us, solving a problem before we even realize it. God is already helping us through our time of trial, and we don't even know it. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, who made the heavens and the earth, and he will not let your